Welcome back to Raptor-One.
Raptor-One, Voyagers of the Stars. Season 2, Chapter 16. Canter Notch. The road after Primer. The sepulchre's span shrank behind them, leaving only a brittle coin of the Primer's axiom tucked beneath Chiron's clay token. No one wanted to say its words aloud. No one wanted to believe they might have to. Ira traced new copper dashes on the slab. Canter Notch, Vigil Bend, Hearthless Span. 3 corridors where rumor said the Primer's axiom had been seeded, 3 mouths it could speak through when it wanted. Canter first, Saran said, the decision plain. It's closest, and if its name means anything, we'll find songs there. Varric muttered, toggling hinge modes as though restless fingers could anchor thought. Songs break easier than steel, easier to bend. Tessa's hum wavered, then steadied again. Then we remind it what we reminded low choir. Music is for rest, not doctrine. The notch ahead. Canter Notch wasn't a corridor so much as a split, a canyon in Gray River where sound itself bent sideways. As they approached, the hull began to vibrate, strings plucked by unseen hands. The resonance wasn't random. It wanted to be a melody, but couldn't quite hold the line. Half radiant hymnal, half autumn cadence, it fell between. Cyrus lifted his blind lens, fighting the itch to capture it. It's like a song that can't decide if it's prayer or war chant. Chiron grimaced, which makes it perfect for the Primer. It thrives in half choices. The first fracture. When they entered the notch, the song found them. The hull thrummed in radiant intervals, warm, familiar, tempting. Then, without warning, it snapped into autumn beats, clipped, marching, merciless. Back and forth, shifting mid-breath, refusing to settle. Ira pressed her palms to the console. Tears pricked her eyes. It's pulling from both. This corridor remembers harmony and hunger and can't tell the difference anymore. Talon scratched shallow timings on their slate, then struck them through before the habit could cling. If we give it rhythm, we trap ourselves. If we deny rhythm, it might break entirely. Darrow's rope twitched in his hands. Then we give it something in between. Furniture, not melody. The Primer's whisper. The lattice didn't appear, but its voice carried through the notch, smooth, persuasive, not commanding. See how they need me? I made song into survival. I kept silence from devouring them. Saran's jaw tightened. You broke songs to make them hungry. Don't claim it was mercy. I gave them teeth when your accord gave them nothing. I taught them to choose me, because I was choice itself. Cyrus stood slowly, tea-tin in hand, his voice soft but firm. You're not choice. You're addiction. The notch answered with another shuddering chord, half prayer, half battle. The crew braced. The test was only beginning. A symphony of teeth. The moment Raptor-One entered deeper into the notch, the hull groaned like a struck bell. The corridor sang in wild lurches. A radiant hymn full of light and breath shattered a heartbeat later into an autumn march that hammered at their bones. The crew braced, each feeling the pull in their own hollows. Ira clutched her copper slate, tears at the edges of her eyes. Its faith and hunger locked in the same throat. She whispered. Varric snarled, toggling hinge settings. Old pain, new bruise, nephew fixed it, trying to blur the rhythm before it made itself law. Tessa pressed the embers sling close, humming flat and steady, a floor against the chaos. Darrow anchored rope to guides, ready to lift any threads the lean right might cast into this mess. Chiron muttered erasure postures, forcing the corridor to treat their presence as inventory, not chorus. Talon scraped a shallow timing into the slate, then crossed it out before it could teach itself a habit. Saran kept both hands steady on the slab, jaw tight, resisting the pull to speak louder than the room. And then, as the melody shuddered between prayer and war, Cyrus stepped forward. Silence as defiance. The lattice hadn't shown itself yet, but its voice coiled through the song like thread through fabric. See, without me, they would break. My story keeps them whole. Cyrus shook his head. Your story keeps them dependent. Your noise, not song. The hull shook as if offended. Radiant tones swelled, voices of imagined choirs, gentle, aching. A beat later, Autom cadence crushed them flat, turning care into command. The notch wanted them to choose. Cyrus lowered his blind lens, sat cross-legged at the console, and set down his tin, and no comment. He folded his hands and breathed. No stream, no show, no performance. The room hesitated, uncertain. The battle of temptation. The fractured song didn't relent, it turned on him. Radiant tones whispered, they love you, let them see you lead. Autumn beats hammered, command them, be obeyed, be remembered. His jaw trembled. He remembered the billions who once watched his every move, the high of being necessary. He wanted, desperately, to open the lens. Tessa's hand brushed his shoulder, hum steady. Check in. Here, he whispered, breath shaky. No beacon. Her grip tightened. Good correction. The ember pulsed gently, warmth threading into his chest. The pressure of audience bent, but didn't break him. How the crew answered. Saran signaled silently, and the others joined the fight, not with force, but with posture. Varric's hinge clattered through ugliness, making the corridor trip when it sought rhythm. Darrow's rope caught a thread as it tried to snare Cyrus's posture, seating it gently on a guide like a clerk left waiting. Ira's rests fell across the hymn like skipped steps, forcing the radiant melody to stumble. Talon's knife jittered at timing just enough to make the Autom march collapse into nonsense. Chiron's tokens clicked, his erasure posture insisting, we are not your chorus. Together, they built boredom into armor. The fractured song faltered. A crack in canter. The notch reeled. Hymn and march slammed against one another until both split apart, leaving silence jagged as glass. The corridor's hum trembled, uncertain of itself. The primer's voice returned, fainter than before. You cannot silence song. If it breaks, it remakes. And remade, it is mine. Cyrus lifted his head, sweat on his brow, but voice steady. Then we won't silence it. We'll sit with it. Let it learn to rest. The ember warmed. The fractured song quieted, not gone, but listening. For the first time, Cantor Notch did not demand a choice. A corridor at the edge. Cantor Notch held its breath. The fractured song that had been tearing itself apart hung in shreds. Hymn and march collapsed into silence sharp enough to cut. The crew knew it wouldn't last. Songs don't vanish. They reform. And the primer had already warned them. If the song rebuilt itself, it would belong to it. Ira pressed her palms against the copper strip. It's fragile. We can guide it, if we're careful. Let it grow back crooked, harmless. Chiron shook his head. Or it rebuilds stronger, and then we've just handed the primer a sharper knife. Tessa cradled the ember, voice steady but low. We can't silence it. That would be cruelty. We have to teach it rest. Cyrus steps forward. Cyrus sat up straighter, hands trembling but firm. Then I'll be its anchor. Everyone turned. You're not serious, Varric growled. It nearly ate you last time. Exactly, Cyrus said. It wanted me. My voice, my audience. If I can sit here and refuse it, stay boring, it might learn to steady itself. But it needs something to lean on. Tessa's eyes softened, but fear flickered at their edges. If you give too much, it could take you. Cyrus smiled faintly. That's why I won't give. I'll lend. There's a difference. The crew's answer. Saran studied him for a long moment. Then they nodded. All right, but you don't go alone. Tessa laid her hum under his breath, a steady ground. Varric toggled the hinge in patterns of ugliness, keeping the rhythm messy, unteachable. Darrow draped rope across the guides, ready to catch any threads that tried to snare Cyrus again. Iris scattered rests like stepping stones, so the song would trip before it found cadence. Talon carved shallow timings and struck them through, ready to drop one if the corridor demanded variety. Chiron whispered erasure posture, forcing the room to log Cyrus as inventory, not spectacle. Saran watched the slab, steady, ready to cut the moment short if it smelled like law. A new melody born. Cyrus breathed slow, 2 in, 4 out. He whispered, not a performance, not a speech, just words plain as furniture. I'm here. I'm steady. I'm not a headline. The fractured notes twitched, tried to rise into him, collapsed. Tried to march, stumbled. Then, hesitant, fragile, they leaned against his stillness. Tessa's hum caught them, softened them. Varric's hinge made them trip before they could become doctrine. Ira's rests let them pause without shame. Slowly, impossibly, the corridor began to hum back. Not him, not march. Something new. A lullaby with no words, fragile as a first step. The ember warmed. The bowls answered present. A lesson the shadow hates. The primer's voice flickered, faint, frustrated. You can't build without story. Without me, they collapse. Saran's voice cut through, steady and plain. Not collapse. Rest. The lullaby trembled, then steadied again, as if the corridor itself agreed. Cyrus smiled, tears at the corners of his eyes. You don't need an audience to be real. Just patience. The notch quieted, not silenced, not broken, just breathing, finally. A breath before the storm. The lullaby the crew had coaxed into being was fragile, a trembling balance of rests, hinge, hum, and rope. For a moment, Cantor Notch seemed willing to accept it. Neither him nor march, neither law nor weapon. Then the walls shuddered. The silence cracked like glass. The primer returned. Not lattice this time, but pressure. 1,000 phantom audiences pressing their faces against the hull, whispering, clapping, begging to be let in. You denied me a mouth, so I will eat yours. Phantom crowds. Cyrus's blind lens flared without power. Overlays streamed across its dark surface. Billions of faces, billions of hearts. Comments cascading in bright floods. Cyrus, don't leave US. We need the truth. You can't be boring. Cyrus trembled. His throat ached to answer. His fingers itched for performance. But he breathed slow, 2 in, 4 out. Check in, Tessa whispered, voice steady. He closed his eyes. Here, no beacon. Good correction, she said, her hum wrapping around him like a shield. Threads with teeth. The lean right, roused by the primer's tantrum, sent filaments in swarms. Not 3 or 4, dozens. They lashed for every Voyager. Ira's rests, trying to mark them as broken rhythm. Varric's hinge, hungry to bill inconsistency. Tessa's hum, desperate to stamp it as signal. Cyrus's stillness, ready to brand it performance by refusal. Rope. Saran barked, and Darrow moved with speed and patience both. He draped coils across guides until the threads found furniture more comfortable than throats. One by one, they sagged into place, but the swarm kept coming. The crew's counterplay. They answered in practiced sequence, each move plain, stubborn, late. Varric cycled hinge ugliness, denying the corridor anything steady enough to legislate. Ira laid rests in awkward places, tripping the primer's phantom choirs until they choked on their own rhythm. Talon used the small knife shallow, once only, to jar the Autom cadence until it lost faith in itself. Chiron whispered erasure postures, convincing the phantom crowd they were auditing empty air. Tessa hummed floor flat, wrapping Cyrus's stillness in warmth so it couldn't be mistaken for a stage. Saran stood steady, watching the slab, writing nothing, waiting for the primer to grow bored. Cyrus, sweating, lifted his tea tin again, and no comment. He set it down firmly beside him. You don't get my mouth. The primer breaks its mask. The phantom crowd faltered. Applause became static. Faces blurred. The flood of comments twisted into one repeated line. Witness equals law. Witness equals law. Witness equals law. The hull trembled with the weight of the axiom. The lullaby nearly collapsed. And then Cyrus did something that made the room stumble. He laughed. Not grandstanding, not cruel. Just an honest laugh, weary and late. Then stop asking to be witnessed. We're not watching. Silence wins around. The phantom flood guttered. The filaments sagged. The hymn and march both shattered again, leaving only the lullaby's fragile hum, steady as a heartbeat. The primer recoiled, its voice thin, retreating into the cracks of the notch. You cannot keep this posture forever. I have other mouths. The crew didn't answer. They banked their silence, plain and stubborn. The ember pulsed warm. The bowls hummed present. Cantor notch, for now, was theirs. Saran veil, the captain's quiet guilt. In the dim of the hall, Saran lingered after the others dispersed. The captain's hands pressed to the slab, steady on the surface, but inside their grip trembled. Saran had watched Cyrus risk more than anyone should have to, using silence the way most use a blade. It had worked, but Saran's fear was sharper than relief. I let him do it. I gave him the room to burn himself down for us. They whispered only to the hood. Late, plain, stubborn, but never at the cost of one life. Not again. Cyrus, the silence after applause. In his bunk, the blind lens sat dark. For the first time in years, he hadn't given billions their story. He hadn't even given them words. Instead, he'd been boring, deliberately, stubbornly boring, and it had saved them. The silence afterward was deafening. He feared he'd cracked something inside himself, some need that would howl later. But when Tessa's hum drifted through the hall, steady, unremarkable, he realized maybe this was what healing sounded like. He whispered into the dark, not for any crowd, but for her. Check in. Here. No beacon. Tessa, a hum made steadier. Tessa sat at the ember's side, the glow warming her palms. She'd felt Cyrus tremble, felt how close he'd come to opening the lens, to surrendering everything. She'd steadied him, but she wasn't sure if she'd steadied herself. The ember pulsed softly, reminding her that warmth didn't need to be spectacular to be real. Her fear was that her growing closeness with Cyrus would make her fragile. But her faith in him whispered something quieter. Perhaps love can be plain too. Varric, rage contained. Varric sat in the maintenance bay, hand on the hinge. He toggled through ugliness, each click sharp in the silence. He had wanted to strike at the lattice, to tear the primer apart with brute refusal. But Cyrus had done it instead, without fists, without fire. The scar along his arm throbbed. He hated that it wasn't rage that saved them, but restraint. Yet, deep down, he respected Cyrus more for surviving temptation than for winning a fight. Ira, fractured faith. Iris stood in the observation blister, eyes on the quiet stars. Cantor Notch had been half radiant, half Autom, its him torn apart. She feared the primer's infection reached deeper into radiance than she dared admit. Still, she had witnessed the lullaby they created, fragile but real. Her prayer was not grand. It was a rest, whispered into the glass. Please, let songs stay songs. Chiron, suspicions multiplied. Chiron sat cross-legged, tokens clinking. He'd seen the primer's axiom plain, witness equals law. Cyrus had nearly become that law's mouthpiece, and it terrified him. Not because Cyrus failed, but because he'd succeeded. Proof that even the loudest man alive could resist the lure. His suspicion was a shield, but for the first time, it cracked enough to let respect in. He muttered, "Maybe you're not a fool after all." Then he locked the thought away before anyone could see it. Talon, the maker's fear. Talon examined the knife, its shallow mark scratched clean. They worried that their tools would one day do what the primer had done, teach lies, not survival. But today, the knife had unsettled doctrine instead of sharpening it. That was enough. Still, their hands trembled. They feared building something that the primer might love. Darrow, rope as mercy. Darrow hung the latest captured threads on a nail by his bunk. Rope had worked again, gentle lifts, patient seats. He worried someday rope wouldn't be enough. But today it had held. He murmured to the threads, "Furniture, not law. Don't forget." The ember's witness. The ember pulsed in its sling, not brighter, not dimmer, just steady. It had been witness to the temptation, the refusal, the silence that had become their weapon. It burned now with the plainness of bread rising, sustenance, not spectacle. For once, the ship itself seemed to sigh in relief.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to be notified about upcoming releases to the Raptor-One series, please subscribe. This has been a Bad Karma Drone production.